Hello YouTube, Dave here again, doing something a little bit different for today's video. I'm going to actually talk directly into the camera. I never thought that I would end up actually doing this, and the reasons for it was, I know some people kind of had asked why I kind of sit behind the camera and just kind of move my hands around. And the reason for that wasn't really necessarily for anonymity. I never really was concerned about, becoming famous or anything like that, or being recognized outside of, YouTube, or, being out in public and having people come up to me. That was never the concern. The biggest thing, I guess, for me was just sort of a self-confidence thing. I'm sort of my harshest critic when it comes to basically everything. And I do recognize that, but the fact of the matter is that, I don't like staring at my face for 15 to 20 minutes, a day, so I didn't think anybody else would really be interested in that either. But we'll give it a shot and see how it goes. I recently did a video in this style for the channel GD Art, where I did a Q&A, where they got a list of questions that was to be asked for a series that they're doing on their channel. And I have to say it was a lot easier to record that because there was a lot less setup. I just had to basically point the camera and talk instead of trying to go around, set up displays, find the miniatures that I wanted to use, kind of get my dice sorted out. So we'll see how this goes. I don't know how many more of these I'll be doing, just because, again, I'm not super comfortable staring into my own face in an LCD screen as I do these recordings. Hopefully I don't chase too many people away with my horrible monster face, but we'll just kind of go from here, see how it turns out, and if you guys enjoy it, maybe I'll try to do a bit more of this in the future. Now that that's out of the way, today's video is another discussion video, and I've been really enjoying these on my channel. I've been having a lot of fun with them, and I've always really enjoyed getting sort of the feedback from you guys, the viewers. And this one is going to be what could be considered another, hot button issue, one that has the potential to get very heated in the comments. So before we do that, before I get to it, I just want to say, as much as I love reading your guys' comments, try to keep it respectful of other people's opinions as well. When I did my video for should DMs charge their players, some of the comments threads started to get very heated, and to the point where I was about to step in if it wasn't for the fact that one of the individuals involved basically had said that they were kind of done. So again, for the person who had that experience, I do apologize. I don't want anybody to come to my channel having to expect that they're going to get into an argument. So that's never been my intention. So when you guys are making your comments, if you're reading other people's comments, that's awesome. If you want to comment on other people's comments as well, that's fantastic as well. Even if you have a different point of view, the only thing that I ask is that you please keep it respectful and understand that when it comes to this wonderful hobby, there's really no right or wrong way to run or to play the game. So all that stuff out of the way, today's subject was suggested by Charles in that DM charging video. So thank you very much, Charles, for the awesome suggestion. It's a subject that I wanted to talk about for a little while now, and I kind of skirted around the issue in a much earlier video when I was doing like tips for Dungeon Masters. And that is the idea of miniatures versus theater of the mind. In which do you prefer? I've done both, and I'm currently doing both. When I first started playing Dungeons & Dragons, it was with 2nd edition, and we never used miniatures. The reason for that is that the combat round in 2nd edition lasted for 60 seconds, instead of the current version, which is 6 seconds. So most of my combats, also when I would run them in 2nd edition, took place either in a dungeon area or when the two groups were so close, or I shouldn't say so close, but when they were close enough to each other that really if somebody wanted to move into melee with one of their combatants, they should have been able to do it in a 60-second span. So it was never an issue. It never seemed to be a problem. It was always, I want to go up to this individual and attack. Then again, you had 60 seconds to do so, so it made sense that you could probably get to them, especially in the dungeon setting where you're usually in like a 30 by 30 room, so there's no reason why you can't get to whatever enemy that you wanted to. When 3rd edition came out, things actually kind of changed, and with their movement rules, attacks of opportunity, reach, and all those things, it really started to get to the point where it felt like we needed to use miniatures. The DM that we were playing with at the time, and this is back when I actually did play more than I DM'd, which was a very, very long time ago. I mean, this was the year 2000, so that's how long ago that was. But you know, he's a good friend of mine, and you know, wasn't the worst DM or anything like that. But the issue was is that, you know, when we weren't using miniatures, and you said you kind of moved to get into combat with somebody, he would kind of have it so that you moved in such a way to provoke attacks of opportunity as much as you could. So we had to use miniatures so that we could move our guys around the board to the point where it's like, you know, if we could avoid the attacks of opportunity, that we would. Going forward, like I said, I've done both, and I've got 2 campaigns on the go right now. One is the Curse of Strahd campaign, which I'm going to start doing update videos for hopefully very soon. And the other campaign that I'm running, I just started a couple months ago, is Out of the Abyss. So with Curse of Strahd, I'm using miniatures, and Out of the Abyss, I have used miniatures so far. With Curse of Strahd, I actually made it the player's choice, what you guys would prefer. Would you prefer using miniatures or not? And the consensus was that people felt more comfortable using miniatures, so therefore we have. With the Out of the Abyss campaign, the couple of things have happened that made using miniatures a bit difficult. One was that we're not usually running the campaign from my home, so you know, all of my stuff is not easy to kind of get access to. And you know, just carrying the player's handbook, DMG monster manual, the spare player's handbook for the players, DM screen, dice, you know, my clipboard with my, you know, my notes, spare paper, all that stuff is heavy enough to carry on its own. And if you're trying to add things like maps or tiles and miniatures on top of that, just becomes a really kind of a big pain in the butt. The other reason that I didn't want to use miniatures for Out of the Abyss is there was a possibility that I was going to be running it predominantly through online sites like Google Hangouts or Skype. Excuse me, still getting over a cold. So if I was going to be running it online, odds are that I wasn't going to be using miniatures anyway, or if I did, it would just be something for my own personal purpose and probably wouldn't be seen on screen by the rest of the players. So when it comes to, you know, which do I prefer, honestly, you know, I kind of prefer, it doesn't, actually, honestly, it doesn't really matter to me. I can run the game either way. I'm comfortable running the game either way. I try to keep things simple if I'm not using miniatures. But I do enjoy using miniatures a lot of the time because, you know, there's some definite benefits to it. Now, I'm going to talk about sort of the pros and cons, in my opinion, of miniatures versus theater of the mind. And before I go any further, I really want to state that I honestly don't like the term theater of the mind. The biggest reason for that is the first few times I ever saw the terminology being used, it was on an online Facebook group where the people were using the term in a way that was meant to make people who played with miniatures feel like they were doing it wrong. You know, the term theater of the mind was used in a way to make these other players feel like they're the superior D&D players because, you know, Dungeons & Dragons was meant to be played without miniatures. You know, it was like, it was the whole point of the game was to use, you know, the theater of the mind. Which is interesting because Dungeons & Dragons was derived from a tabletop miniatures game before role-playing games even really existed. In fact, Zero Edition says right on the front here, this is, you know, the main, one of the first books from the original version of Dungeons & Dragons, and it says miniatures figures right on there. So I don't really buy into the argument that Dungeons & Dragons is meant to be played without miniatures. So going a little bit further into it, I want to talk about the pros and cons of each. So I'm going to start with the pros and cons of not using miniatures or relying on, you know, your imagination or theater of the mind. So with theater of the mind, the main advantages to it is that combat has the potential to flow a lot faster because you can just say that you kind of move here and you do your thing. You're not worried about counting movement squares or things like that. For the DM, it can also be easier because you don't have to sort of plan out your maps in terms of each individual encounter. You don't have to worry about getting tiles set up for each individual encounter, which is time consuming, and you're also not spending time outside of the game digging through your collection of miniatures to find the right things to use in combat. So it can definitely make things flow a lot faster. For that to work, however, everybody sort of has to be on the same page. The DM has to be able to describe easily where everybody is in relation to everybody else, and it has to be simple enough that everybody can kind of follow it. I've played in games in the past where that was kind of an issue, and the DM would assume that the players were in one spot when the players would assume that they were in a different spot. So when you found out that you were kind of surrounded, or you didn't have a way to get to another one of the player characters, it was confusing. So the downside is that if it's at all kind of if the description is sort of ambiguous in even the slightest, it can cause the question of, okay, where are they and where am I, to happen on basically everybody's turn. And that can really kind of slow things down to a grind, especially if, you know, the DM has a clear vision of where everybody is in his mind, and the players don't think that that's where they were. So it can cause a little bit of confusion, a little bit of difficulties with having the combat flow properly. So the plus side with miniatures is that with the visual representation, that never happens. You can't, you know, be confused about where you are versus where the monsters are, because you can look down and you can see it on the board. The downside of it, again, is the things that I discussed earlier with the Theater of the Mind, is that it takes a lot more setup time for the Dungeon Master. It also means that most combats have to be, you know, you take a sort of a bit of a break between when you set up the situation to when you actually start the combat, because the DM either has to draw out the area on like a dry erase board or, you know, grid, or if they're using tiles, they have to lay the tiles out, set up the miniatures, and then you can start the combat. So it can sort of break the flow of the game, which, if you're not using miniatures, has potential to flow a lot faster, because you can go from the setup of, you know, you walk into this room and there's, you know, X number of creatures, to rolling initiative and starting combat right away. With miniatures, there's a lot more of that setup. The DM may spend a lot of time outside of the game drawing up the maps ahead of time to use for each individual area, but that takes a lot of time. You also run the risk of not having the right miniatures to represent what you're battling with, and that can be kind of confusing as well when you have to use, say, you know, an ogre to represent a minotaur. It just, you know, it kind of breaks the illusion, I guess, or breaks the ambiance of what you've been trying to set up. Ultimately, like I said, though, there's really no wrong way to play the game. If you play with miniatures and everyone in your group has an awesome time, then that's fantastic and that's great, and it's, you know, the way that it should be for your group. If you're running a game where nobody uses miniatures, you will rely on the Theater of the Mind, and everybody's having a great time, then again, that's awesome. So as far as my personal preference go, I actually kind of like using miniatures when it makes sense. Sometimes if you're doing a lot of like random encounters, and you know, traveling through vast distances, it may not make sense to use miniatures all the time. If you're in a dungeon setting, it may make more sense. Like I said, I've got two different campaigns where I do both, and I think that both of them seem to flow just fine. I noticed that if a group is used to using miniatures and you're in a combat where you're not, it becomes a little bit more difficult for them. Because my last Curse of Strahd campaign session that I ran, actually I didn't use miniatures for the encounters, because it just felt like, you know, I just didn't want to set everything up, and it was so open-ended, I didn't know which way the players were actually going to end up going, so I didn't want to plan for something specific and then have them go in the opposite direction, which is kind of good, because they're kind of going in the opposite direction of what I would have assumed that they may have. So anyway, what I want to know from you guys is, which do you prefer? Do you prefer using miniatures? Do you prefer using Theater of the Mind? Do you sort of like a mix of both? You know, if you're a DM who doesn't use miniatures, how do you track everything in combat? How do you know where everybody is? Do you just rely on your own, you know, imagination? Or do you have something like a piece of graph paper that you have behind the screen where you have like X's and O's for the monsters and the player characters? That's something that I'd kind of like to know from each of you. So let me know what you guys think. You know, let me know what you prefer. And again, the only thing is that I ask that you kind of keep it respectful of everybody else's opinions. So if you like miniatures and you find people that don't use miniatures or like commenting and you wanted to have a discussion with them, that's fine. Keep it respectful. Don't become confrontational. Don't become defensive. You know, this is all a hobby that we should all be able to enjoy, no matter how we play it. And again, keep in mind that the game originally came from a miniatures game. Anyway, thank you guys very much for watching. Thank you guys very much for taking the time to comment below. I can't wait to read everybody's comments. I love these types of videos. And also, if you don't mind, let me know what you think of this style of video. Are you okay staring at my ugly mug for 15 minutes or not? If you're okay with it, then maybe I'll try to do a little bit more. Anyway, again, thank you guys very much for watching. I always appreciate it. Your support, your feedback, everything is great, and we'll see you next time.